Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make homemade croissants. Making croissants at home is not as hard as it seems. If you follow these tips and tricks that I'm going to share in this video, you should end up with great homemade croissants at the end. It is very time consuming, but it's definitely worth every step in the process. So let's get started. To make the dough, in a large bowl, add in the flour, sugar, instant dry yeast, and salt. Make sure the salt doesn't touch the yeast or it will kill it. And mix them together until they're combined. Then add in the warm milk and mix it in until a dough starts forming. Then lightly flour the work surface. Turn the dough out onto the floured work surface and knead it for a minute or two until it's smooth. Then lightly flour a small sheet pan. Place the dough onto the pan. Flatten it into a disc. Wrap it in plastic wrap. And let it rise in the fridge for at least 6 hours or overnight is best. It's fine if it doesn't double in size. Next we need to make a butter block. So cut the butter into pieces. And place them onto a sheet of parchment paper, making it into a rectangle shape and overlapping them. Then pound and roll it using a rolling pin so the pieces stick together. Then trim off the edges and place them on top and use them to fill in any gaps. Place the parchment paper back on top and roll the pieces back together. Then use a ruler to measure 8 by 4 inches and trim the butter off the edges and place it on top of the block. And keep rolling and trimming until you have a butter block that's 8 by 4 inches. Then place it into the fridge for about 15 minutes so it gets cold again. It's very important that the butter stays cold, and I'll explain why later. Then lightly flour the work surface. Place the dough onto the floured work surface. Press out the air. And roll it out into an 8 by 16 inch rectangle, trying to keep the thickness even and the edges straight. Once it's an 8 by 16 inch rectangle, always brush off any loose flour that's on the dough because that will prevent flaky layers from forming in the croissants. Then remove the butter block from the fridge, take off the parchment paper, and add the butter block on top of the dough. Fold in the edges. Brush off loose flour. And fold in the top and the bottom. And flip it over. And this is the tricky part. The butter cannot be too hard or too soft. It should be just slightly stiffer than the dough. If the butter is too hard, it will break into pieces and the croissants won't come out as flaky. If it's too soft, the butter will absorb into the dough and the croissants won't be flaky at all. So if the butter is too hard at this point, let it sit for a few minutes to allow the butter to soften a bit. If it's too soft, place the dough into the fridge to let the butter harden. Again, the butter should be just slightly stiffer than the dough. Once the butter is about right, lightly flour the work surface and roll out the dough until it's 24 inches long and 10 inches wide. Then brush off any loose flour. Then next is to fold the dough. You can do this in two ways. One way is to fold each end in thirds across on each side. Or another way is to fold each end halfway across and then fold it in half. This is the first turn, so that's rolling out the dough and folding it, which creates the flaky layers that croissants are known for. So fold the dough using whichever method you like, brushing off loose flour. Then wrap it in plastic wrap and place it into the fridge for 30 minutes. It's very important to chill the dough after each turn so the butter stays cold and won't absorb into the dough. Then remove it from the fridge and place it onto a lightly floured work surface. Roll it out again until it's 24 inches long and 10 inches wide. Then fold the dough again using whichever method you like, brushing off loose flour. Wrap it in plastic wrap and place it back into the fridge for another 30 minutes. Then repeat that process again so you do a total of 3 turns. Then this time, wrap the dough completely in plastic wrap and leave it in the fridge overnight. Then place the dough onto a lightly floured work surface and cut it in half so you don't have to roll it as long. And wrap one half in plastic wrap and keep it in the fridge while you're working on the first half. And roll it out until it's 24 inches long and 10 inches wide, working quickly before the butter becomes too soft. If the dough feels greasy at any point, or if you find the dough keeps pulling back as you roll it, then stop rolling and wrap it up and place it into the fridge for about 10 minutes or so. And if the dough is rolled out too big, then fold it up so it fits in the fridge. Then mark every 6 inches of dough. I just mark it using a 6-inch cake pop stick. And use a pizza cutter or a long sharp knife to cut all the way across the dough. Then cut it diagonally, going from the bottom left corner to the top right corner. Then take each piece and roll it wider if you need to. Brush off loose flour and roll it all the way up. And pull each end to the front and pinch them together. And do that for the rest of them. Then place each of the croissants onto a sheet pan lined with parchment paper and set them aside for now. Then repeat that process with the second half of the dough. Then cover them in a clean kitchen towel and let them rise in a warm place no hotter than 85 degrees for 1 to 2 hours until they nearly double in size. Meanwhile, preheat the oven to 400 degrees. Once the croissants have proofed, you can remove the towels. Then beat together the egg and milk to make an egg wash. And gently brush it on top of the croissants, and that will give them a nice shiny golden brown color once they bake. And bake them in the oven for about 20 minutes until they're a nice golden brown color. Halfway through the baking time, rotate the pans and switch oven racks so they bake evenly. Then once they're done, remove them from the oven and let them cool for a few minutes. And you can serve them still warm or cooled to room temperature. And they're best eaten within a day, but you can always freeze them so they last longer. And just take one out and heat it up in the microwave, and it will taste just as good as the day they were made. And that's how to make homemade croissants. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I have so many more on my channel, so be sure to check them out and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.